Welcome to the Hockey Writers Fantasy Forecheck, where we talk to you about all things fantasy, keeper league, redraft, and dynasty. We're going to give you hot players to pick up, prospects on the rise, sleepers you should or shouldn't think of acquiring, and prospects who are looking to break out at the NHL level. I'm your host, Caleb Kerney.
And I am Jacob Strozyk.
And today we are going through our Central Division recap. Just like the previous weeks, Jacob and I will go back and forth and give our best fantasy performer and our biggest fantasy surprise from each team in that division. Now, before we get started, small little announcement. After next week's recap episode, we are going to be changing to a bi-weekly release schedule until the preseason. So just something to be aware of. When you see that there isn't an episode from us 2 weeks from now, don't get scared. No need to fret. We will be back. We're just, because it's the off season, most fantasy leagues are done. I'm in a fantasy league that isn't done yet, but we do weird stuff. So most fantasy leagues are done for the rest of the year. So with that in mind, we will kick off the Central Division. Jacob, I think we'll start with Colorado here. We'll start at the top of the standings. Who is the best fantasy performer for you?
Let's go to Colorado. Bit of an obvious pick as far as, top performers here, but I'm going to talk about Nathan MacKinnon. 100-point season. He threw up another 40-plus goals. He's just an absolute beast when it comes to offensive production, as is literally anybody on, that Colorado top line. They missed out on having Landeskog as part of their usual trio for the entire season. So that, might have hurt them a little bit, but it didn't seem to slow MacKinnon or another top end player down. But in general, MacKinnon, you can't go wrong with somebody who scores 100 plus points. He had 34 power play points. And besides, Rantanen and Makar, he's just their overall best fantasy performer.
100%. MacKinnon is kind of the easy answer. Makar, if your league values defensemen quite a bit. I went with Mikko Rantanen. 82 games played, 55 goals, 50 assists, 105 points. 22 minutes and 13 seconds of time on ice per game, 4 minutes and 9 seconds of power play time on ice per game. He's out there a lot. And especially with Landeskog injured, that accounts for a lot of his time on ice. 306 shots, 77 hits, 37 power play points, 18% shooting percentage, 16.2 in his career. And he was shooting 3.7 shots on goal per game. That is crazy. The goals, career high in goals, just fantastic. You always want to get those goal scorers. Now, will he replicate that yet next year? It remains to be seen. Of course, we'll see how they do in the playoffs here. Their series is at a game 7 now, so we'll see just how far they go. But take a look at who surprised us the most in Colorado now. Jacob, who do you got?
I went with Arturi Lehkonen. For me, I found myself picking him up a couple of times throughout the year when he did get dropped, and kind of by the January mark is when he found a permanent home on somebody else's team right before I was about to grab him again. But he was just a good, consistent performer, and he found his way to just put pucks in the back of the net and get points in, situations where you might not think, oh, well, Colorado lost Kadri. How are they going to really replace him? And Lehkonen kind of stepped up and took that role, not nearly as far, but he still was a good, consistent performer, and he stepped up when needed. 21 goals, 51 points. He had 20 power play points, and he had 93 hits on top of that. So he had a little bit of extra coverage on the hit side. So somebody like Lehkonen was just a good value player to have throughout the year.
Absolutely. And that's a great pick. I had him a couple times in my league. He definitely performed for me well when I did have him. And someone who I wish that I had, who was fantastic, and there was questions surrounding him going into the season, the big goaltending acquisition, Alexander Gorgiev, 62 games played, 40 wins, 5 shutouts, 2.53 goals against average, 918 save percentage, a 66.1 quality start percentage, and a 929 even strength save percentage. This guy was top notch all year. Gave them better goaltending, arguably, than Kemper did last year. And surprisingly, before this season, he had not played more than 34 games in a season. And I think he, at least in his first season, he proved that he could be a number one goaltender, which is something that Colorado hasn't had for a couple of years. So he's kind of my biggest surprise there in Colorado. And moving right along to Dallas, they did quite well this year, and a lot of that is due to Jake Ottinger. And Jake Ottinger, in 62 games, he had 37 wins, 5 shutouts again, 2.37 goals against average, a 919 save percentage, a 61.3 quality start percentage, and a 923 even strength save percentage. Now, in the 2 previous years, he had a 920 and a 916 even strength save percentage. So he's been steadily climbing in that specific area, and he just performed well throughout the entire season. Like I said, he played 62 games, which, that was definitely to the, pardon me, to the top end of what goaltenders played this year. Gone are the days of the 70 game played goaltenders. Jacob, who is right up there with Ottinger for you with Dallas?
To me, it's super obvious. It's got to be Jason Robertson. He was the biggest part of the Dallas offense throughout the entire year. And, there wasn't a single point in the year where anybody was going, oh, well, maybe he'll cool down, because he was just rocketing up and scoring goals that were ridiculous sometimes. He almost had 50, and he threw up over 100 points. He had 41 power play points, which was a stat that just blew me out of the water as far as, fantasy value goes. So I don't think there's a single league that doesn't value power play points. So somebody like Robertson this year was just absolute dynamite when it came to offensive coverage. If you're somebody who believed in him a bunch of years ago and you held on to him, you are cheering in the streets at the moment.
100%. Robertson just went to another level this year. There's no doubt about it. And my biggest surprise from Dallas, somebody who also took their game to another level, Miro Heiskanen. Okay. And this was huge, and this was almost predictable. With John Klingberg gone from the blue line in Dallas, that left a wide open spot on the power play for Heiskanen, and he did not disappoint this year. 79 games played, 62 assists. Okay. Craziness. All right. That doubles his previous career high in assists of 31 from last year. He also greatly increased his power play points. His previous high was 11, which he had both in 2021 to 22 and the 2020 to 2021 seasons. And this year he had 34 power play points. And the other big increase in stats here is his almost minute increase of power play time on ice. And that right there is the recipe to his success. He also chipped in 11 goals, for 73 total points. And you add in his 206 shots, his 49 hits. he was an all-around offensive stud from the back end. 96 blocks, so some decent peripheral coverage kind of across the board. Sure, he could hit more, but he's offensively minded. So you'll take those hits. You'll take those hits as they come. So Heiskanen was just fantastic. Jacob, who surprised you?
Yeah, I love what Heiskanen did this year. That was awesome. But a player that I thought was a good surprise was a rookie, somebody called Wyatt Johnston. Very, very good rookie player, and he got some big ice time down the stretch for Dallas. Finished the year with 24 goals, 17 assists. So, point totals weren't through the roof, but for a rookie, you're not going to complain about those numbers. And if you have a lot of depth in your league, somebody who's throwing up 24 goals is still going to give you some good fantasy value. And he's somebody that's still very, very young on a Dallas team that has future openings at his position Pavelski's getting older, Sagan's getting older, and he's going to start getting more and more opportunities as those players start to decline. So he's going to have way more fantasy value in the coming years, but he had some solid value this year just based off of his offensive production alone. There's just potential for a lot more.
Definitely potential for a lot more. Didn't see a lot of power play time. So like Jacob said, once those older players sort of move on either to other teams, which we'll see how likely that is, or just decide they're done and retire, he's definitely a guy to look out for with lots of potential. Moving right along to the team that they defeated in the first round of the playoffs, the Minnesota Wild. Jacob, best fantasy performer from Minnesota. Who do you got?
Again, I'm going to go for the easy answer, and I'm going to say Kaprizov because you can never go wrong with mentioning a team's best player, especially when they still are performing like the team's best player. Still had 40 goals. He was down in his points total this year, but he had some injuries that kind of stunted him a little bit. But you can't complain about somebody who's scoring 40 goals, and to add to his value, his offensive value, he had 32 power play points. So you're not going to find anything wrong with a player that can put up even strength and power play numbers. So Kaprizov will always be a fantastic fantasy option. And besides the one that you're going to talk about, I'd say he was their best.
100%. And now the guy who I'm going to talk about, this is sort of my Boone Jenner pick for this division, and that's Joel Eriksson. Okay, he gets the points, he gets the peripherals, he gets the time on ice, which helps him get the peripherals and the points, and he doesn't blow you out of the water with points. I mean, this year he had 23 goals and 38 assists, which was good for 61 points, which career highs across the board. Career high in points percentage or points pace per game, 0.78. His previous high he got last year, 0.65. So he's just ratcheting it up every year. His shots increased this year. He took 247 shots, which went up from last year's 2.9 shots on goal per game to 3.2 shots on goal per game. Love to see that still climbing. He's 26 years old. The kid's fantastic. He also increased his power play points from last year, which was his previous high was 17 that he got last year, 23 this year. Increase in ice time, average ice time by 30 seconds to the tune of 19 minutes per game. And then also sort of that same half minute added on to his power play time on ice per game, 3 minutes and 24 seconds. When last year he had 2 minutes, 59 seconds of average power play time on ice per game. Now, he's basically their de facto second line center because they don't know who their first line center is. And it should be Rossi, but there's things going on there. So we'll see what happens next year as Minnesota face, a very early first round exit, and maybe he becomes the first line center as sort of like a two-way Kopitar type who takes tough defensive matchups, but also gets a lot of ice time. And that could free up somebody, like if they decide to have Marco Rossi as a center next year full time on their team, then they could try to give him more sheltered minutes and control those minutes a lot more. But that's definitely something to keep an eye on going forward next year. And the one last thing about Joel Eriksson Ek, 9.3 shooting percentage this year, 9.8 in his career. So he's right in that wheelhouse with more opportunities, more power play time on ice. And if he gets first line even strength minutes, you could see all of these numbers increase next year. Now, Jacob, who is the big surprise for you in Minnesota?
Yeah, I'm going to talk. We'll try and keep it brief about this kid because I love him. And that's Matt Boldy. He's just an absolute dynamo, this kid is. He played some absolutely huge minutes when there were some key players out for Minnesota, and he just took it and hit the ground running, and he just broke out. Finished the year 31 goals, 63 points, and he added 63 hits to go with it. So, I mean, just his gameplay alone was something unreal, but his fantasy value as far as offensive production and possibly even peripheral coverage in the future is just massive. He had 63 hits to kind of close out the year, which isn't phenomenal, but he's a player that does play physical and he can up those hit numbers. So on top of his offensive production, he does have some peripheral coverage potential when it comes to his fantasy value. If you have the chance to grab Boldy, if somebody is undervaluing him, don't be that person because he's going to be a huge part of the offense in Minnesota for a very, very long time. And whether that means he's playing first line or second line, it doesn't matter. He's going to be the one driving plays and finishing plays. So as far as fantasy owners are concerned, grab him before you regret it.
100%. And like Minnesota's going to need those players as their first round series against Dallas sort of showed us that lack of firepower kind of hurt them. I mean, defensively, they're usually pretty good, but they were just outmatched with Dallas and all the offensive dynamos that are on that team. And they need to let players like Boldy and Rossi play if they want to make it past the first round. And just to touch quickly on his peripherals, his shots on goal per game increased from his rookie year last year, 2.4 shots on goal per game last year, 3.1 shots on goal per game this year. We could see another increase next year. We could see similar numbers. I'd be fine with just similar numbers. And with Minnesota being the defensive team that they are, I could also see those hit numbers sort of stay around that sort of 65 per 82 games played sort of mark. His shooting percentage did actually go down by 1% from last year, but he played almost twice the games. He shot more, so that's why he got 31 goals instead of 15. My big surprise from Minnesota this year, Philip Gustafsson. Okay. When he was brought in, there was a bit of an uncertainty surrounding him. Could he give enough support to Marc-Andre Fleury and, help this team get to the playoffs? And arguably, I could say that he was better. In 39 games played, 22 wins, 3 shutouts, 2.10 goals against average, a .931 save percentage, 69.2 quality start percentage, and a .932 even strength save percentage. He's only 24 years old. Okay. And this should make the Wild more comfortable to potentially move on from Marc-Andre Fleury if they wanted to, or to reduce Marc-Andre Fleury's role next year. Now, they do have another Swedish defensive prospect in their midst in Jesper Wallstad, and he could see some NHL action next year. But it's tough with Fleury, on the books for another season, and Gustafsson playing as well as he did this year. Unless there's a major injury, or unless Fleury decides to hang up the skates in the offseason, we might not see Wallstad next year. So that's just something to kind of keep an eye on. And it's sad but true. Moving along to Winnipeg. For me, their top dog was Josh Morrissey. Okay. And in 78 games played, 16 goals and 60 assists for 76 points, almost a point per game for the first time in his entire career. 28 power play points, 24 minutes and 14 seconds of time on ice per game, 3 minutes and 43 seconds of power play time on ice per game, 172 shots, 89 hits, 119 blocks, 9.3 shooting percentage, 6.4 in his career. Only Kyle Connor had more points on this team than Morrissey did. That's all you need to know. If your league values defenseman in any way, he paid off massively for you this year if you decided to pick him up. Jacob, who's the best guy? Who's the best guy in Winnipeg?
Yeah, I was one of those people that regretted not grabbing Morrissey in my draft this past year when he was available and nobody kept him. But, hindsight's 2020. But one person you can always count on, in my opinion, as far as fantasy goes, is Kyle Connor. He is easily one of the most consistent players in the league as far as his scoring goes. And this year, he didn't disappoint. He had 80 points, and he normally is at the 40 goal mark for when he's scoring. He was below that. He didn't quite hit the 40 goal mark this year, but he still was the one kind of driving the offense in Winnipeg. For all intents and purposes, he is pretty much their best player. And by the end of the year, he had 29 power play points, so he had some good special teams coverage there, and he added 2 hat tricks on top of that. So if your league values hat tricks, he's one of those players that does score in bunches, and he can get you those additional points from something like a hat trick, because that's what he is at his core. He's a goal scorer, and he's going to put the puck in the back of the net. It was just a bit of a down year for him as far as goal scoring production goes, but he'll bounce back next year, and he'll still be hovering around that 80 to 90 point mark. And that's something that fantasy owners can just revel in as he continues to be consistent.
100%. And the player who had the most goals, who was my biggest surprise, Mark Scheifele. He had 42 goals. Okay. Most goals on the team. And the bit of a lukewarm surprise, if I can call it that. The goals was great, but he only had 26 assists, which the last time that he had less than 30 assists was his first full year in the league in 2013-14. Okay, and in that season, he had 13 goals and 21 assists in 63 games played. I don't know what happened to the assists this year. It's just like he woke up and he's like, I'm not going to pass it all. I'm just going to shoot. So that's clearly it worked for him. Is he going to score 40 goals again? He was a 20% shooting percentage this year. So I'm going to guess no. 16.8 shooting percentage in his career. So it's high. it's high. If he shot like 18, that would be a little bit more like, okay, maybe he can get close to the 42 goals again. But the 20% is just like, no, I'm sorry. He's not going to happen. Only 22 power play points, which for the time on ice that he spent on the power play, 3 minutes and 40 seconds on average per game, that's a little concerning. And now he has been a point per game player. Not this year, obviously, but for the last 6 years prior to this year, he was a point per game player. So I'd look for him to potentially bounce back next year. And maybe he gets in that 30 goal range, probably at least 25 to 30, I would say. And depending on what happens in Winnipeg, because it looks like things are a little tense over there right now, maybe he sticks around, maybe he gets traded, something to keep in consideration. Now, who surprised you the most?
For me, I'm kind of in that same boat as you. With it was more of a lukewarm season as opposed to just a outright good or outright bad season, because there wasn't really much of that in Winnipeg. It was just kind of average throughout the year. So I went with Blake Wheeler, and it's not like he had a bad year. He still finished with a good amount of points. He had some issues with injuries, but he was still a consistent player throughout the entire year. His point totals were down, but at the end of the day, he is aging, so his decline is kind of expected, but he still provides some decent fantasy value overall from his offensive production. He's always been more of a playmaker. He's got more assists than he does goals. So you can always kind of count on him to chip in some points here and there. But, as he continues to age and as Winnipeg, might have the potential to tear it down and start moving pieces out, I'm not sure if Wheeler is a pickup as opposed to a leaving your waiver pool type player as things kind of go on. So it was not great, but it wasn't terrible either.
That's a great way to describe a lot of the seasons, fantasy-wise, that came out of Winnipeg. Now, before moving on to our next teams, we're going to take a quick break to listen to a message from the Hockey Writers.
Interested in writing for the Hockey Writers? If you have experience writing about hockey, are passionate about the sport, and are looking to take your writing to the next level, the Hockey Writers could be the place for you. Here at THW, you will have the opportunity to hone your craft at one of the world's largest and most respected hockey publishers. You will have control over what you write, be able to seek out media credentials, and be supported by a large network of writers and editors. Plus, you'll get paid for doing it. If you're interested and want to know more about team openings and requirements, please visit the Write for THW page on the Hockey Writers website. A link to that page is also listed in the description.
And we are back. We are going to continue our Central Division preview with all of the non-playoff teams. We're going to start with Nashville. Jacob, why don't you tell us about the best fantasy option in Nashville?
For me, I'm going to talk about Roman Josi. Just for me, best overall fantasy option out of Nashville. It was a bit of a down year as far as his scoring goal goes, especially comparative to last year. But, that was something ridiculous that he did last year. So, you're not going to complain about a defenseman that scores you points, especially someone that, creeps up on 20 goals. You're not going to have any problems with that. So I doubt Josi is really available in many leagues that aren't like redrafts. But if you are in a redraft league, he's somebody that you should really pay attention to when you're drafting defensemen, because he does go fairly quickly in the earlier rounds because he has a lot of value. He gets blocks, so he has peripheral coverage beyond his scoring, and he's just their best overall fantasy player. And I think people should continue to reap the rewards from him as he keeps playing for the next handful of years.
Roman Josi is a top 5 fantasy option, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I would say consistently in his career. He drives that offensive boat in Nashville because they can't figure out their forwards, and Forsberg
has glass bones.
Glass bones and gets injured when he looks at a stick wrong. My top fantasy option, and has been for many years from Nashville, is UC Saros. I mean, this goaltender is gold. Okay, he's 28 years old, so he's still super young. 64 games played, 33 wins, 2.69 goals against average, 919 save percentage, a 62.5 quality start percentage, and only 2 shutouts this year, which, I mean, he hasn't had more than 4, but he's had at least 3 since the 2017-18 season. So, I mean, a bit of a down year in that respect, but he usually gives you these decent rate stats. He's getting the majority of starts in Nashville. I mean, he was in 3 less games this year, won 5 less games than last year, but he also lost 2 less games this year. So that's at least positive. His quality start percentage is pretty consistent. His save percentage is pretty consistent. And his even strength save percentage was 923 this year. And that's pretty consistent. He's got 923, 927, 942, 920, 919, 929. You get the idea. He's just dynamite from a goaltending perspective. One of the top, I'd say easily top 5 fantasy options for goaltenders in the entire league. Jacob, was there anybody that surprised you in a good or negative way in Nashville this year?
Yeah, just not so much a quote unquote surprise, just a bit more of a disappointment as far as fantasy goes. But it's Matt Duchene. Last year, he had an absolute massive career year when he had 86 points, 43 goals, 43 assists. But this year, he dropped back down to what he normally is at. He had 56 points. He finished with 22 goals, and that was in 71 games. And that's about what he's been at as far as his average for his career. So, like I said, it didn't surprise me that he was at this number, but when a player has such a big year, you expect them to try and be producing at a similar rate. So it was disappointment for the sake of, maybe I wasn't expecting another 86 points, but I was expecting maybe about 75. Just a bit of a drop off as opposed to, 30 points. And that's just, it's not good enough from a player that's supposed to be one of their best offensive threats. And I think Duchene has more in him since he showed that he could do it last year. So I think he'll bounce back a little bit and be closer to the 30 goal, maybe 70 point mark next year.
That would be really fantastic to see. We'll see if he gets there. I mean, the forward core in general needs to step up next year. And part of that solution could involve the player who is my surprise from Nashville. That's Luke Evangelista. Okay, he came in, he played 24 games. He got 7 goals, 8 assists for 15 points. That's pretty good for a rookie. That's pretty good. I mean, 0.63 points per game is what that is. Over a whole season, that's 51 points. That's pretty good for a guy just getting his first shake. 13% shooting percentage, 2.3 shots on goal per game. You like to see a good shot on goal per game played from these young players. It's a bit concerning when you see someone who is offensive, comes in their first year, and they get like a shot on goal per game. That's a bit concerning, and maybe there's other things going on when you see that, but this was nice to see from him. 9 hits and 6 blocks, which, I mean, prorated over a whole season would give you 31 hits and 21 blocks, which isn't bad for a rookie. And as he gets older and develops more, he's only 21 years old. He's going to get more hits and he'll get more blocks. 3 minutes and 13 seconds of power play time on ice per game. That is money right there. Okay. He only had 2 power play points, but if he's with the team for a whole year, plays the top 6 role, gets first power play unit minutes, I think he could get 60 next year, 60 points, I think, and at least 20 to 25 goals. And especially if Nashville just figures themselves out. I don't know if it's forcing Forsberg to retire so that money gets cleared up and they don't have to worry if he's going to get injured or not. Just let him sail off into the sunset, sort of like how Clefbaum did with the Oilers. And just let the kids play. Let the kids play. Bring in Bruce Boudreau. Let the kids play. Okay. And Evangelista did play. You know, he had 3 minutes and 13 minutes of power play time on ice per game, like I said earlier, but also 16 minutes and 34 seconds of time on ice per game. It's beautiful, beautiful. Keep him in that range for the next couple of years. Give him somebody around him to play with, and you'll be good. It'll be interesting to see what Nashville does going forward. Now, going to talk about another young player from the next team, the St. Louis Blues. Okay, Jacob Vrana. Sort of a similar type situation where played minimal amount of games, but had a big impact in those games. And with Vrana, he played 25 games, 11 goals, 5 assists for 16 points. Okay, you'll love to see that. Vrana has always been known as a shooter. Obviously there was some kind of falling out with Detroit, which sort of forced this move to St. Louis. But 17.5 shooting percentage this year. His career is 14.6. He had 63 shots on goal, which is good for 2.5 shots on goal per game, 14 hits. He could produce more on the power play, but again, he only played 25 games, only averaged 2 minutes and 12 seconds of power play time on ice per game, and only 14.5 minutes of time on ice per game. That's sort of the one concern. He had one season where he averaged 15 minutes of time on ice per game. Every other season has been less than that. So that's the big concern with Vrana. If you're not going to give him the total minutes, just feed him power play minutes. He's a sniper. Let him shoot. If St. Louis does that next year, look out. This kid could score 30 or more. Okay. But he needs that power play time because obviously they don't trust him. Coaches don't trust him at even strength because he's been labeled a top 6 talent and just hasn't really quite gotten that opportunity. So, Jacob, St. Louis, who's the best guy?
Yeah, Vrana's always been a good depth player. But for me, the best player as far as St. Louis goes is going to be Pavel Buchnevich. Just another great season out of him. Last year, he had his breakout year with St. Louis after he got moved there. And he put up another just solid year. Had some injuries plague him throughout the year, but he was over a point a game again. 63 games played, had 67 points, 26 of those were goals. But the stat that stood out to me most was the shooting percentage, 21.1 shooting percentage. So his shots were down, but his goals didn't really drop off. In fact, his, scoring went up technically as far as that is concerned. So he's a bit of I don't want to say under the radar, but he's not being paid attention to as much as some of the other names that were on St. Louis, like a Robert Thomas or a Vrana, or before he was traded in O'Reilly, because he would be, a disappointment candidate in general. But since he's not on there, I'm not going to talk about him yet. I had other options for that. But as far as best production goes, it has to be Buchnevich, just because he is establishing himself as a consistent offensive performer. And that's something that you will love as a fantasy owner, especially from someone on a team that probably isn't going to be spectacular next year, someone who will still be able to be picked up in those mid or late rounds that you can still use to provide your fantasy team some offensive boost. Buchnevich is somebody that you should pay attention to and grab if you have the opportunity, because he has some really, really good offensive value.
Yeah, definitely if you can acquire him for a low cost or lower cost, just because he's a bit of a less known quantity. I mean, I'm surprised you picked Buchnevich. I mean, I left Jordan Kyrou just hanging at the bottom of the tree for you, and he's just going to sit there until we find another reason to talk about him. But my biggest surprise, and I'll keep this short and sweet, Jordan Binnington. Massive disappointment. You should only own this goaltender if you are in a league that values workload and doesn't factor in rate stats. If you factor in save percentage and goals against average, stay the heck away from Binnington. Okay? He was terrible this year. If that's not what your league is, unless they get a much better goaltender next year, he played 61 games this year. Probably going to play 60-ish games next year unless they get somebody to replace him. Don't draft him unless your league just counts saves and wins. And even then, just get him for the saves because he's not going to win anything. Jacob, who surprised you?
Yeah, just quick comment on Binnington. His stats since his Stanley Cup winning year have just continued to get worse and worse and worse. I would avoid Binnington as a whole personally. But as far as surprise goes, I could have went with O'Reilly, but I didn't want to be the guy that picks on him quite yet. So instead, I'm going to go with somebody that kind of disappointed me personally as far as my fantasy team is concerned. And that's going to be Torrey Krug. He's normally a very good offensive threat from the blue line. And he had a decent number of points. He had over 30 points this year, but he had some injuries plague him throughout the year, so he wasn't able to get up to speed the way he probably liked. And when he was in the lineup, he just didn't quite have it. He lost out on some key ice time. He's normally in a much bigger role, and there were a number of games that he was playing sub 20 minutes. So for a player that normally has great offensive fantasy value from the back end, he just wasn't a good option at all. And that's partially due to the poor season that St. Louis had in general. But I was personally disappointed in Krug a lot this year because I kept trying to pick him up and, use him for my advantage. But he just didn't have it when I needed him to. And that just it's one that hurt me. So I needed to mention it.
Perfect. Moving right along. My favorite team as far as fantasy went this past year, because they just seemed like a gold mine that people were not exploring. The Arizona Coyotes. A down year for sure, but that's because half their cap is buried.
Dead cap.
Is dead cap. Okay. So, Jacob, let's continue with you. Who was the best Arizona Coyote for fantasy this year?
Well, there were two big ones, but since you stole the one that I really wanted to go into, I'll talk about the other one. I'm going to go with Clayton Keller. This man is an absolute menace. He's a menace to the Coyotes. He's a menace to the league. And he was just the definition of an offensive spitfire throughout pretty much the entire year. On a team like Arizona, he finished with 86 points, and he didn't crack the 40-goal mark. Close, he had 37 goals, and of those 86 points, only 20 were power play points. So he was mostly an even strength performer, and Arizona didn't have an amazing, power play or anything, but 20 power play points is still, pretty solid for an offensive player. So there's more potential for better power play production from him next year. He is definitely somebody that flew under the radar as far as his, value goes, just because he was out in the desert. But if you were paying attention to anything he was doing and you grabbed him before anybody else, you should hold on to him, and you will continue to have some incredible offensive value, especially as the Coyotes get their prospects up into their system and they become a really, really good team. Keller is only going to have increased, if not similar, offensive production, and that is just phenomenal for fantasy owners.
100%. He's 24 years old, not even in his prime yet, and he has back-to-back seasons of close to a point per game or better. Last year, 0.94 points per game pace. Okay, so the best fantasy performer, as far as I was concerned, with the Coyotes was Carl Vejmelka. Okay, 50 games played this year, which was 2 less than last year, I might add. 18 wins, 3.41 goals against average, better than last year. 900 save percentage, better than last year. 46% quality start percentage, better than last year. It's almost like Arizona was better this year. He also lost a lot less games. He lost 24 this year and 32 last year. Okay. And now his even strength save percentage went up. Last year it was 906. This year was 911. Okay. So as this team gets better around him, a better defense core, a better forward core, these numbers are going to slowly keep getting better. I think this year he just had the mindset from the beginning, like, okay, we're not going to be amazing. I'll just do what I can. And he did what he needed to. Okay. He had 3 shutouts. Okay. He had more shutouts than UC Saros. Okay. The potential is there. He's 26 years old. He's a 6'4", 224-pound goaltender. He, especially if you value volume, if you value shots a lot and you don't get dinged for like goals against average, a great fantasy option for sure out of Arizona. Now, who's the surprise for you, Jacob?
For me, it's going to be Nick Schmaltz. Just overall, a good offensive year out of him. 58 points. There was only 12 power play points to go along with that 58 points, so he didn't get a lot of like peripheral coverage there, but he has the potential for more. As one of the better offensive players that the Coyotes have access to, he's not old by any means, and he has the potential for more scoring. I think he can be a 30-goal scorer next year and be pushing that 65-point mark, just get a bit of an increase. But he's a good possession player overall, and he can score. So for fantasy and out of a team like the Coyotes, you're not going to be, looking the other way from a player like that. He's somebody you can grab for cheap or even pick up off your waiver wire, and he's just going to give you good numbers.
Absolutely. Schmaltz is always a good option offensively. He's a bit streaky, but he was a bit more consistent this year. Arizona had a line of Nick Schmaltz, Clayton Keller, and Barrett Hayton for a lot of this season. And Barrett Hayton is my big surprise out of Arizona this year. I mean, he kind of broke out this year, and he played 82 games. Okay, he was healthy for a whole season and played 82 games.
That's big.
Fantastic. He's had some injury issues in his very young career so far, but 19 goals, 24 assists for 43 points, only 10 power play points, 17 and a half minutes of time on ice per game, 2 minutes and 19 seconds of power play time on ice per game, 178 shots, 83 hits. Whew, sign me up. 10.7 shooting percentage. His career's 10.8. Okay, so he wasn't doing anything crazy. As he gets better, he's going to score more, okay? And towards the end of the season, in the last 39 games, he scored 14 goals and had 29 points. So 29 of his 43 points came in the last half of the year. And he's right on the breakout threshold of 176 games played. So next year, don't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if he hits 60 points next year, to be honest.
I wouldn't either.
The shots on goal per game went up from 1.4 last year to 2.2. Love to see it. He didn't throw as many hits as he did last year, and last year he played 22 games less, but he blocks some shots. He gets you a hit per game, which is fantastic. If he can bump those shot on goal numbers to 3 shots or more, he's going to be a fantastic option, especially as Arizona gets better. If they land Fantilli or Bedard, look out, especially with if they get Bedard or Fantilli, they will probably play in Arizona for the whole year next year. And look for these offensive guys, Keller, Schmaltz, Hayton, to all get their offensive numbers boosted. And whoever ends up leading the power play next year, it could be Moser, it could be Valimaki, but we'll see. So moving right along to the last team, Chicago. I don't really know what to say about.
There's not much to say.
And even from a fantasy perspective, like my best guy that I would say was Seth Jones. And I mean, he's always kind of been a solid option as an all-around defender in 72 games, 12 goals, 25 assists for 37 points, which isn't a lot for him. 12 power play points, also not a lot. 24 minutes and 27 seconds of time on ice per game. 3 minutes and 18 seconds of power play time on ice per game, 178 shots, 106 hits, 125 blocks. He gets you those peripherals across the board. That's where a lot of his value comes from. He usually gets at least 10 goals per year, usually more, but he at least hits that threshold, which is good. This year, 6.7 shooting percentage, 5.1 career shooting percentage. He's the best option there is there. Okay. And they were tanking for Bedard this year. Let's just be honest about that. And frankly, they had every reason to. But not a great team to look at. Honestly, I almost felt like skipping them once I looked at like all the stats from all the players. But Jacob, who is the best Chicago player this year?
Yeah, it was rough. I remember at the start of the year just being like, yeah, I'm going to avoid Chicago players like the plague this year because they're just obviously tanking really, really hard. But somebody that didn't get that memo, at least while he was there and before he got traded, was Patrick Kane. He didn't care. He was still there to play. He was going to be and try and be what Patrick Kane is. It was, a bit of a down year as far as his production goes, but he was still their best player while he was there. 16 goals, 45 points, 54 games. He's never been, a good peripheral type player. He'll get you shots, he'll get you points, he'll get you power play points, but he never really gets you any hits or blocks or anything like that. And he had a couple of stretches where he actually was really hot. And that was right before the trade deadline happened, and he was just an absolute spitfire for them at 34 years old. Ultimately, he was traded to the Rangers, so you're not going to be looking for him in Chicago next year to be doing anything for you at all. But, in general, Chicago players are tough to look at as far as fantasy value goes. But ultimately next year, there will be a couple players that have to step up and will give some value, but there's almost no way to tell right now who that's going to be.
That's 100% the case. And I mean, that's in part due to the exits from the team, the trades, and then also my biggest surprise, Jonathan Toews. He's not getting brought back last year. His contract expires and there's a mutual parting of ways, and Toews could retire. So in all honesty, just see what's going to happen. If he goes to a good team and you see that he's doing decent in preseason and he seems healthy, but ever since he got COVID, there have been so many complications for him that have resulted because of that. And, I feel for the guy. This is not fun to like end your career with all these health issues, but it's probably just better for him for his health and also for fantasy owners in general if he just retires. Just take care of yourself, Taves. Okay? Don't worry about us fantasy people. We'll be okay. There'll be new guys that we can fawn over. So, Taves, my biggest disappointing surprise. Jacob, who surprised you?
I guess one, as I scoured through all of it, the one person I found that was maybe a bit of a standout was Taylor Radish. Young player. He got moved over in one of the trades from Tampa Bay. And he put up 20 goals. And on this Chicago team, 20 goals is honestly pretty impressive. He had, a decent amount of ice time throughout the year, and he got a little bit more down the stretch. But since Chicago is in that full-blown rebuilding mode, he's going to be one of those players that gets that opportunity to play in the top six, and he might provide some value. A sneaky stat he had 82 hits. So there was a little bit of, additional peripheral coverage beyond his lower end offensive production. So there's some potential there to maybe get some increased production, but he hasn't had a long enough career to know if he's going to consistently do that. This might just be an outlier, but keep an eye on him because he is going to be looked on to be one of the better players in Chicago as they kind of go full blown into the rebuild and start building through the draft to get the prospects into the system.
Absolutely. Definitely be on the lookout. If you're looking for depth for your team, if you're looking for somebody to sort of spot start here and there, depending on schedule and things like that, take a flyer on a Chicago player, take a flyer on one of these young guys, if it's Radish or if it's Kurisev is how you say his name. One of these young, even Lucas Reichel, as much as I don't like to bring him up because I don't think he's going to really be a great player.
Murphy's not terrible either.
Frank Mazur, when he eventually makes the league, he will probably drive the offensive bus for Chicago in some way, shape, or form. And also, don't forget, there's also Bedard, Fantilli, Zach Benson, Leo Carlson at the top end of this draft. And they will very well land one of those who could potentially pop into their lineup right away. So that's all the time that we have for today's show. Next week, we will dive into our final division recap with the Pacific Division. So tune in for that discussion. And also a friendly reminder that after next week's show, we will move to a bi-weekly show until next season's training camp. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at THW Fantasy. I'm on Twitter at Caleb Scouting.
And I am also on Twitter at Stroz67.
If you are watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the Hockey Writers YouTube channel. If you are listening in podcast format, subscribe to the podcast and please leave us a review on whatever platform you listen to. You've been listening to the Hockey Writers Fantasy Forecheck. Keep your stick on the ice, get pucks in deep, and give it 110%, eh? I'll see you next week.